The headline that is the most important headline this morning is the Daily Mail, and I'll show you that now. Starmer guilty as anyone over grooming gangs. This is Maggie Oliver, who is an amazing campaigner. She has spoken out this morning and says Keir Starmer is as guilty as anyone over failures to tackle grooming gangs. Maggie Oliver, a former detective, this was her claim last night. And obviously there's been this enormous pressure for the government to deliver a public inquiry. And Maggie Oliver says she has no faith in the Prime Minister's desire to get to know the truth. Just in terms of this, I think many of us this morning want to know, what exactly did they know? When did they know it? Why was nothing done about it? Were they tiptoeing around issues of ethnicity and race? And how did they manage to let down so many young people in these barbaric crimes that were affected? And joining me now, I'm delighted to say, is Maggie Oliver, former Detective Constable at the Greater Manchester Police. Good morning to you, Maggie.
Good morning, David.
Can I just start by saying I just think you're incredibly brave, and what you have said is so welcome. Just talk us through what made you sort of put your head on the block here.
Because I have to. This has been my life now. This topic has haunted me since I first became aware of what we call grooming gangs, but I think rape gangs is a better description. In 2005, when I first learned about this horrific crime and how it has destroyed thousands and thousands of children's lives, I was horrified that nothing was being done. I worked on a case that was closed down by Greater Manchester Police, the official reason being because they would not put resources in. And I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Now, 20 years ago, I was extremely naive. I am not naive anymore. This is my subject, and I know it, David, inside out. So when I said that yesterday, it's because I feel a great responsibility to speak out for the many who have been ignored and failed and had their lives destroyed. And, I'm given that platform, and I always try to speak the truth as I see it. Now, after that case that I was on, and I didn't know at the time, but at that point in 2008, Keir Starmer was the Director of Public Prosecutions, and he instructed all police forces, through Gordon Brown, on a circular that I've never seen, but I know through other professionals who worked in the Crown Prosecution Service that it is actually the truth, that a circular was sent out to all police forces telling them they mustn't prosecute these paedophiles because the children were making a decision they were complicit in their abuse. Now, for me, as Director of Public Prosecutions, that is unforgivable.
But Maggie, I do not understand. How on earth can a child be complicit?
They can't be. But, they were blamed for their own abuse, and they were judged, and, they were categorised as unreliable witnesses. They're not unreliable. They're 11, 12, 13-year-old children who would be given alcohol beyond their wildest imaginings. They are being passed around like a piece of meat, and by the time they realise that they have been abused, they feel shame, they feel guilt. But the authorities, including the Director of Public Prosecutions and police and social services, it is their legal duty to protect children in our country. So we can't have I keep hearing this two-tier Keir. Well, I don't just blame Keir Starmer. I blame the whole lot of them. I don't want to just single him out. We've had, many, many years of Conservative rule, and they equally have been negligent in dealing with this crime. We had the National Abuse Inquiry. We're calling now. All the newspapers are saying we need a public inquiry. Let me remind everybody, we've had one. We had the ICSA National Abuse Inquiry. It took 7 years, David, cost £100 million, and 2 weeks of that inquiry was given to the grooming gang problem. And within that 2 weeks, 95% of the time that was allowed to be spoken about this was given to chief constables, to heads of social services. There was one victim allowed to speak. people like me, as a non-institutional core participant, we were denied any right to speak. Our statements were massacred. It was a cover-up, and 20 recommendations that followed after 7 years, not one has been implemented. So, Keir Starmer is not the only one responsible. There has been a whole catalogue of failures. So, it's all right calling for a public inquiry, but the thing is, I don't trust any of them to be entrusted with that public inquiry, because if you don't have the right people who want to see change, you can spend another 5 years wasting your breath in the way that I have on the ICSA inquiry, the Rochdale inquiry, the Augusta inquiry, the Baird review. We get recommendations and we get words and we see no action, and we see repeats of the same failures time and time and time again. And what I want to see is real people who, I'm a spokesperson for the millions and millions of decent, ordinary people throughout this country who look at children and know that we as a society should be protecting those children, whatever it takes. And yet I'm dealing with many victims today in my charity, the Maggie Oliver Foundation. We are inundated with desperate victims of all kinds of sexual crime who are waiting for a trial, who are waiting for maybe a prosecution that never comes. And they can wait 2, 3, 4 years for that trial. And yet we see people who say something on social media now, arrested and put before the courts in 3 days, sent to prison for 3 years. We've got things upside down, and I feel a great responsibility to use the knowledge I've gained in 20 years, David, to try and push this forward. And to be honest, I am relieved that we have Elon Musk and other people in other countries who are as horrified by these failures as I still am, because I am sick and tired of speaking to politicians like Rishi Sunak. I've met them all, Rishi Sunak, Suella Braverman, Priti Patel. I have, spoken about this day in and day out for 10 years, and yet Talk have been very good, actually, in keeping the spotlight, as have a couple of other news channels. But by and large, mainstream media, it's a 5-day wonder, and then it fades away again. But it doesn't fade away for the victims. They spend their lives trying to get justice, trying to deal with the trauma, trying to overcome the fact that they have been blamed and criminalised and let down by a country which should be protecting them. So that's why I said what I said. I didn't expect it to, go on the front page of the Daily Mail, but I stand by every word I've said because it is true. Repeated governments, repeated politicians, professionals have failed children monumentally, and I want things to change.
I couldn't agree more in everything you say, and in fact those accounts are so harrowing, reading about these young teenagers who, as you say, were passed around like pieces of meat, and yet when they cried out, when they went to law enforcement, that one girl was told to go away until you're not drunk. She even gave a DNA sample which would have implicated those people. And then, of course, and I mentioned this earlier, in 2012 when Keir Starmer, who was DPP, and I used this word this morning, I said it was word salad. It's utter nonsense, the stuff he came out with. What was going on at that time? He talks about there was a misunderstanding. No, it wasn't. There wasn't a misunderstanding. You did not do what you were meant to do.
100%, David. There was no misunderstanding. How can you misunderstand when a 12-year-old child is being raped? They cannot give consent. So if you're the Director of Public Prosecution and you don't see that that is a criminal offence that needs the full weight of the law thrown against it, in my opinion, you shouldn't be the Director of Public Prosecutions. And right at that time, I was a serving police officer in Greater Manchester Police working on that Rochdale case. And everybody who follows this story will know that, I worked for 4 years to bring the drama Three Girls to the screen. And the drama was a great drama, but it didn't go nearly far enough in holding the police and the CPS to account. I know that story inside out. And one of those children, Ruby in the drama, she was being abused from the age of being raped from the age of 12. She was just 13, and she was made pregnant. The police unlawfully, without her consent, seized the fetus in a termination. 2 years later, I was brought onto that case because the fetus was found in a routine property review in GMP. Nothing had been done about it. And I was asked to bring her on board and her sister to help us put away a very predatory, wicked gang of men who were raping children throughout Rochdale. Now, we had DNA, we had a fetus. I managed to get her to give statements and to agree to work with the police. Even that man, Adil Khan, was not charged with rape. He was charged with sexual activity with a child. He was out of prison in less than 4 years. And people will say, how can that be? That's because they chose to charge him with lesser charges. They're easier to prove. They don't have to do anything other than prove there's a fetus. That, for me, isn't justice, David.
Well, it isn't.
It isn't justice, and it sends a message out that actually it's not that bad. Well, Keir Starmer was involved in that case. Nazir Afzal was the Crown prosecutor. I am still enraged by what they did to those children. Amber was a victim of horrendous rape and abuse. She was portrayed in court as complicit in her abuse, as a madam. It took me 10 years to get the new Chief Constable to acknowledge she was indeed a victim, that GMP were incompetent in their handling. So all these things, when I talk about this subject, I'm not just talking about one case. I'm talking about thousands of cases that I've been involved in, and all of those victims won't get a voice. So I try and I can never be their voice, but I try and talk about the failures that they all have shared. And the final thing I'd like to say before I let you get a word in, David, is that to date, not one senior police officer, not one chief constable, not one council leader or senior social services leader has been held criminally to account. They haven't even sacked somebody for their gross neglect of duty. And I want to see that happen. You know, you can't just be a public servant and turn away from children and victims whose duty it is for you to protect and then retire as though you've done nothing wrong. I'm sorry, that is just wrong. Every single thread of this is wrong. And, you know, I'm hoping now we're going to get action, because I've seen times like this before when everything focuses on this topic and then it fades away and nothing changes, David. I want to see change, and having Elon Musk come in and an international spotlight shining on the UK, which is meant to be a civilised country. We used to be ahead of the game with the criminal justice system. Now, my heart goes out to serving police officers because they are hamstrung by political manoeuvrings from many parties, and it just isn't good enough.
Maggie, I totally agree. And when you hear testimonials from people like Simon Danchuk as well, the former Labour MP, saying he was told to keep quiet, that actually parliamentary politics superseded any of this. Just in terms of that, you say you don't want a public inquiry, you want police chiefs to be made accountable, to be brought to justice. Also, you talked about the fact you'd spoken to all of the protagonists in all of this. To the Prime Minister, who was DPP, have you spoken to him?
No, I've never yet had the pleasure of meeting Keir Starmer, but I met Rishi Sunak and Suella Braverman, and I took victims to speak to them so that victims could be heard. You know, it could be heard from the horse's mouth. I never want to speak on behalf of victims, but I want them to be heard. And they're so easy to dismiss, as, you know, history shows. You know, they deserve to be protected. You know, what I'm saying about a public inquiry is, you know, that is just a title. It is just a word. 7 years in the ICSA inquiry, and what have we gained from it? Nothing. Nothing has changed. So a public inquiry as a title means nothing. It's who's going to lead it. What are we going to achieve? I have seen them as an excuse for another cover-up, for, delaying tactics, for people being given false hope. And that is even worse than doing nothing. I want to see an outsider, truly independent, not a political pawn who will tick a box and we end up with nothing. That is not what I want. Now, is Elon Musk the person to see this forward? I don't know, but I do know that the people that I have worked with before, who I have seen shine a spotlight, we've had words, we've had recommendations, we have had no change and no action, but we do have now public awareness at the highest level. And if there's one thing that I will claim some credit for, it is in keeping this in the public arena and making the public aware of what was going on behind the scenes. But we still need action, because we've had, an encyclopedia of words and excuses, and politicians actually wanting to feather their own nest but not putting the neck on the block when it's needed. And I might sound cynical and twisted, but I have lived this for so many years, David, that I know what's needed. I have yet to see that being delivered.
And Maggie, you speak so eloquently about systemic failures, about cover-ups, about not getting to the bottom of this. The fact is, it does seem that people sat on evidence, that things weren't sorted out. These poor girls suffered and continue to suffer as a result of what happened to them. And this is all because of political correctness, not actually calling it out for what it was. Can I just ask you, given all of the above, are you confident this couldn't happen again, or do you think that we're still in the same position?
As I briefly mentioned, I set up my own charity, the Maggie Oliver Foundation. We are funded entirely by the public. I do not want a penny from the establishment, because I want to be able to speak the truth. And in my foundation, we are supporting and advocating for victims of all kinds of sexual abuse every single day. So I can tell you, hand on my heart, that things in the criminal justice system are broken, that victims are being failed on an industrial scale. There are less than 2 in every 100 reported rapes or abuse that ever reaches court. We need to look at a bigger picture, though, David. This isn't just about criminal consequences. It's about societal change. It's about stepping in early. It's about allowing charities like mine to advocate for victims, to support them when the criminal justice system can't help them, because, to be honest, if the evidence isn't there, we will never get to court. But that doesn't mean that every victim who's been raped and abused doesn't need support to recover. Trauma, as trauma lasts for a lifetime. And in the foundation, we offer emotional support to victims who have never spoken about their abuse, who have not had criminal cases taken forward and are left just abandoned with nowhere to go. They're the kind of changes that should be part of this conversation. It isn't just about point scoring, about, what a terrible job the police are doing. It's a much, much wider issue than that. And I'm talking today about, because it's in the spotlight, about a public inquiry. But I want victims to be heard, to be supported. I want accountability, criminal accountability, for those chief constables and those senior public officials who have failed repeatedly in their duty. I want to see change really come. And I want to see every victim who goes to the authorities to be heard, to be listened to. And if we can't have a prosecution, they need support in other ways. And that just doesn't happen.
Maggie, thank you so much for speaking so eloquently and also speaking out as well. So many comments saying how much people admire your bravery as well. Maggie, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.